Hello and welcome to the Christian Book Collective, a space where readers and writers unite, and where I, Lydia Houghton, interview some of your favourite Christian authors. I am so excited to share with you episode 1 of my new podcast, where I was privileged to have a conversation with author, speaker, pastor Sam Allberry, author of many books, but specifically in today's episode, we focused on his book, 7 Myths About Singleness. I'm so excited for you to hear this, and I hope you enjoy listening to it as much as I enjoyed and was honoured to have this conversation. I read your book. I was in my 3rd year of uni. I think it was about 2 years ago I read it, and it was life-changing. I had it recommended to me by another Christian, and I've now recommended it to other Christians. The same with many of your books. But yeah, just to begin with, what led you to write 7 Myths About Singleness?
Thank you. Yes. Well, I had been doing some teaching on sexuality. I'd published a book on that, and I kept seeing the same thing happening each time. I'd be speaking on why Jesus is good news for our sexuality and kind of getting into that. And I kept consistently having people come up to me afterwards saying, I'm not wrestling with same-sex attraction, but you've really helped me to think about singleness. And I kept getting that feedback. So I then started looking through what am I saying about singleness? Um, and it was more the framing of how we think about singleness and marriage in general. So I thought, okay, there's obviously some traction here. Let's go a bit deeper on this. I began to do some teaching on singleness itself and realized, partly through my own experience of seeing what the Bible says, that there were things that surprised me. Well, I thought, I can't realize the Bible said that about singleness. And then realized, okay, there are some kind of underlying misconceptions that people have. So let's build the teaching around those. And then that led to the book.
Yeah, great. It's really interesting you've said that because someone who I love Christian books and books on singleness, they certainly don't seem to be as common as kind of books on dating or books on marriage as such. So yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's so interesting that that was a space that people were wanting to know what the Bible had to say about, and that your other books kind of led to that. Hadn't realized that. Um, and yeah, I love reading. I also love writing. Can you describe the process? It's a very broad question, but of writing the book. Just
Yeah.
whatever you want to add. I don't really know where to begin with this, but what did that process look like?
Say for me, and it will vary from person to person, obviously. But two things really helped me to write. One is to have done some teaching already on what I'm writing about, because I love to road test ideas. I love to see what questions people have, what landed, what didn't make sense, what I missed out. So teaching on something a few times first really helps me get a sense of it. It helps me hone the material. It helps me get clearer, helps me see where people are at and where it's engaging with people. So that's one thing. And it means by the time I come to write, I've already done a lot of the thinking and thought through how to articulate things already. The other thing for me, I know other people are different on this. I kind of need to get out of my house to write. And so I would stay with some particular friends in Durham, and try and get a few days at a time and just binge write. I know some people who can write, 1,000 or so words every day. They just have like a couple of hours each day and they write something every day. I need to put everything else to one side and really zero in. It takes me a day just to get into writing. And so it's nice then to have a couple of days to then really be focused in on it and then come back to whatever I've been putting to one side. During with that book, and the final chapter of which is about the ways in which singleness is difficult and hard. Um, I actually was going through a lot of those hard things as I was writing the book, which I'm glad about because I just meant I could try to put into words what I was experiencing as one example of how singleness can sometimes be difficult.
And you mentioned having, some of the like teaching material already. So was it a case of you putting what you'd kind of already researched into the book, or did you think, right, I want this chapter, and then orchestrating it specifically for the chapter, if that makes sense?
It was a bit of both.
Okay.
So a couple of the chapters were really me writing up things I had already been teaching. So they were sort of already done in my head. They just needed to be turned into book chapters. There were a couple of other chapters where I was thinking, okay, I only briefly mentioned this in a talk, but I'd love to go deeper on it. That final chapter, I hadn't kind of presented any of that stuff before in quite that way. The chapter on singleness as a calling, I was going into much more depth than I had done before. So some of it was turning material that already existed into chapter form, and other parts of it were actually writing for me new chapters.
And obviously, you mentioned that final chapter, very much you were going through what you were writing about, which I think, yeah, that's incredibly powerful, that is. Um, there were quite a few parts in the book that really stood out to me. Um, even 2 years on, I think it's John Piper who says that if one line in a book has changed your life, then the book has been life changing. There
Hmm.
are at least two parts of your this specific book that you've written that have stayed with me this whole time. The first part is you, for those listening who might not have read the book, but I'm sure a lot of the people listening have, when this goes out on YouTube. One standout part for me is when you write about Jesus himself was single. So who are we to suggest that a life without marriage is incomplete? So I just want to ask you, I mean, you write about it in the book, but why is this concept so important for a Christian to grasp?
Yeah, this was a light bulb moment for me. Was thinking through, if Jesus is the perfect human being, which he obviously is in the Bible, we see that very explicitly, the most complete human being, and yet the fact he was single means we can't then say marriage is essential for being a whole person. Marriage is wonderful. It's an extraordinary gift from God. It's a great blessing. But the moment we put it into the category of you can't be complete without this, we are unwittingly taking away from the full humanity of Jesus. And in our the Western cultural moment right now, there's so much focus on, if you don't have romantic love in your life, you're barely human, you're subhuman, you're incomplete. Your life is a sort of withered, shriveled form of what it could be. And I just want to push back on that and say, actually, we can't say that of Jesus, and therefore we mustn't assume it of anybody else. So that really helped me, and helped me to realize whatever I might be feeling about singleness on a given day, I'm not incomplete as a human being by function of my singleness. There may be other things in my life that are I'm doing or not doing that are diminishing my experience of being a human being, but I can't pin it down on not being married.
That's it's so powerful and sad that that's kind of a countercultural thing to say. I read a fair amount of Christian fiction, and even that's branded as Christian fiction, there can be such an idolatry of the kind of the romance in it. And it's so obviously you write this in your book, but it's just so dangerous. If you hold that to that standard, like you say in your book, if you are single, many problems, but equally, if you are in a relationship and you put that person in the place or in the place of Jesus, they'll never be the perfect human being Jesus is, and he's the one who needs to be the God in our lives. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really, really powerful. And similarly, another statement that stayed with me, that really helped me in my singleness, um, is that we tend to compare the downs of singleness with the ups of marriage, which is something that you put into words. And I vividly remember reading it and thinking, oh my goodness, that's so true. But I don't know if many of us realize that we do that.
Hmm.
Um, and going on from that, how can reading Christian books about singleness, for example, or just, I suppose, Christian books in general, how can that help with this tendency to compare the lows of singleness with the ups of marriage?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually being a pastor that helped me on this, because I was seeing a lot of marriages up close in my own church family and seeing the sort of different seasons married people have and the ups and downs that they go through. And it made me realize as I was walking with some people through some marital difficulties, it just made me think, gosh, actually, singleness is not looking so bad right now in terms of what I was going through. And I remember thinking, man, I'm quite glad to be as I am rather than as they presently were. So I think and plus I was also very blessed with some married friends who were just honest. And so they didn't sugarcoat everything. They weren't just giving me the Instagram version of their marriage. They were letting me in and just saying, yeah, this is great. This is difficult. And that just gave me a more rounded view of what married life is like. And I began to realize there's a couple of times where married people have said to me, because of situations they were in at the time, where they've said that they envy my singleness. And it never occurred to me that a married person would ever envy someone's singleness, because the expectation is you marry someone and then it's happily ever after and everything is sunshine and roses. So that just awakened me to the idea, okay, there are some hardships in marriage I don't experience by being single. And so it's not simply that the grass is greener, the grass is just different. And there are downs of marriage that are different to the downs of singleness, and there are ups of marriage that are different to the ups of singleness. But it made me realize there are more ups to my singleness than I had been thinking of, and more downs to marriage than I had been thinking of. And that just helped me to, I hope, have a bit more of an objective, balanced perception of both marriage and singleness. And in terms of what we read, it depends what we're reading, because some Christian books can so idealize marriage, and the Bible manages to both give us a theologically exalted view of marriage, whilst at the same time giving us a realistic view of what two sinners are like. Sometimes the literature doesn't always reflect that. And books on singleness can often dwell more on the downs than the ups, and unwittingly feed into that narrative of life would actually be easier if we were married. So I was just wanting to write something that I hope would be fair to both states and encourage single people that there's more good things than we often see in our singleness.
Now you've said that, it's funny, isn't it? Quite a few books on Christian books on dating I've read, it's almost how to get through your singleness or how to cope, not kind of how to thrive.
Yeah, how to graduate out of it.
That's really, I've not realized that until you've just said it there. I remember when I read your book, I said in my review, I was so thankful I'd read it in singleness because it's a reality check. It's, if you're having those hard days, it's well, married people have hard days as well. And there are specific joys that or experiences that are unique. So be present and, you know, you can thrive in this season, because we have God and He is ultimately all we need, isn't He? Mm.
Yeah. And I think, to be honest, in my experience and what I've seen, I think the downs of marriage are harder than the downs of singleness.
Mm.
I'd rather be unhappily single than unhappily married.
Mm. Mm.
Um, that's just from some of the stuff I've seen. But yeah, life in this world is always going to have its own griefs. And if we think switching out of singleness to marriage will remove that, then we're being very naive. And actually, it's going to make us a very difficult person to be married to.
Mm. Yeah, because like you said, it's two sinners joining together in marriage, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
I'm already really excited for everyone to hear this conversation because I get quite a lot of comments on my YouTube channel. It's only a small YouTube channel, but of people saying how much they struggle in singleness and I think like you've already referred to, our culture just glorifies romance and that can make it even harder. So I'm already excited for people to hear this conversation because yeah, that's it's really powerful. Um, in your books, but specifically Seven Myths About Singleness, you include personal anecdotes, and like you mentioned, maybe in that last chapter, that was specifically because you were going through what you were kind of writing about. But how important do you think it is for an author to include personal anecdotes in like a Christian nonfiction book? Yeah, is it important or?
I think it can be, yes. So there's a responsible and an irresponsible way to do it. Just as in a sermon, you don't want to hear the pastor kind of, there would be some inappropriate sharing that could go on. But some personal stories can help ground what you're saying, and it's a way of showing the reader, listen, I've had to wrestle with this truth myself. This truth has gone to work on me. Um, and I think that can be helpful. It can be a worked example of what it's like to live with the truth that we're writing about. And it can kind of seed the reader's imagination so they can begin to think more about how this might impact them. I certainly don't want to ever come across as someone who's very detached about the truth I'm writing on. I think it's helpful to appropriately bring in some personal experience of, man, this has been a hard truth for me to come to terms with at times, or this has really lifted my spirits, or the book I've recently written on what it means to be in Christ. I really wanted to say, actually, this has been life changing for me to see this, and I really want other people to get in on this too. It's so there's certainly an inappropriate way of doing it, but I think done well, it's a really helpful ingredient. Just to share some own experience of what this can be like. It can literally flesh out the truths that we're articulating.
And that new book you just referred to, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's called One with My Lord.
Mhm.
It's all about our union with Jesus, and the sort of the basic point of the book is that the New Testament's main way of speaking about followers of Jesus isn't to use the word Christian, but to use the phrase in Christ. And there's something in that if we don't notice that, we will miss, which is that when we come to faith in Jesus, when he draws us to himself, we become spiritually one with him. We are in him, he is in us. And that provides just a much clearer lens on the rest of our Christian life. Uh, our pursuit of holiness, our understanding of salvation, our place in the church, our sense of our own identity, all of those things suddenly make more sense when we realize we are in Christ. So it's meant to be a practical kind of walk through that particular truth.
Sounds wonderful. Can't wait to read it. I remember when that truth began to dawn on me for the first time and just what an incredible realization it was. Um, that's wonderful. I think with books, like that new book with Seven Myths About Singleness, one of my pastors always says, reading can be so wonderful as a Christian because it's like you're having a one-on-one conversation with someone, and
Mm.
reading a book, I don't know, in your house, in your personal space, for me anyway, it can be quite kind of an intimate experience and quite a an intimate experience with God if you then bring kind of what you've read to God in prayer, and things, and just referring back to the personal anecdotes, that I find that
Mm.
really helpful as well in relating to an author and in knowing that what I go through, I'm not alone in what I go through, things like that. And yeah, with regards to Seven Myths About Singleness, what was your hope that the book would achieve with readers? I suppose you've kind of referred to this a little bit already, but
Yeah, well, to have a more biblical view of singleness, so to realize, particularly given our own cultural context, that the Bible is far more positive about singleness than we are. And I was hoping for that for two groups of people. One is for single people, and the other was for married people. One of the most encouraging bits of feedback I've had from that book is married people saying they feel like they've grown in their insights on marriage. Um, I hadn't thought of that when I was writing it, but it makes sense. If we've got singleness wrong in some way, it normally means we've also got marriage wrong too, because what we think about the one shapes how we think about the other. Um, so I was really hoping it would help single people to receive their singleness with the right kind of biblical posture and mindset. And I was hoping it would help married people to better be friends to single people in the church to be more clear on how they can help single people to flourish in their church, and yeah, raise all the boats in the harbor.
That's brilliant. One thing my church is really good at, and my pastor specifically, is not treating, this would be wrong, but not treating the single people in the congregation as kind of, oh, well, you're going towards marriage, but recognizing, recognizing singleness, and yeah, that's really wonderful. Um, I was going to ask you another. Oh yeah, so you were talking about how you had some teaching material already prepped, to kind of come into writing the book. But through writing this book, Sam, do you think that your knowledge deepened on what the Bible has to say about singleness?
Oh yeah, hugely.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I already had a sort of some understanding of it from teaching on it, but as
yeah.
I started to dive deeper, it really provided added depth to my understanding. I made a few discoveries along the way in the course of writing it. I used to think, okay, you do all of your thinking, and then when you finished your thinking, you then write, and you then put down all the things that you now think. I've realized actually writing is a wonderful way to think. So I've realized on some things I don't know what I think about it until I've started writing on it. So the writing itself often provides the clarity. Um, so just it's a great way. So it's made me realize I need to do more writing, even if you know if it's published or not makes no difference. I'm writing because that's a way for me to process things, and if it serves someone else, that's an added bonus. But it's worth doing for its own sake because the discipline of putting something into words can often really shape and help our understanding.
I was going to ask you specifically if you've got any advice for writers, for Christians who want to write books, but I feel like we've got two great pieces of advice there. But yeah, would you have anything else to say to aspiring writers, or I don't know, um, people who are studying theology and want to maybe put what they've studied into a book or something like that?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. One is just to start writing, and don't be writing thinking this is page one of my magnum opus. Just write for the sake of I'm learning. I'm training the muscle of being able to write and speak and articulate myself clearly. And this is worth it for its own sake, whether or not it ends up being a book or not. If we put all the focus on getting published, I think we will see the writing process as a means rather than as an end. Um, the end is that it serves us to put things into words and to sharpen our thinking, and not simply to be, I want this to be something other people pay money to read. Um, so just start writing, write about whatever it is you're thinking about today. Don't have a book outline in mind if you don't need to. Just something that's, I think of it in these terms. I feel like I have an itchy brain, and writing is the best way to scratch it. So whatever my brain is itching about today, just gonna put some words down on that just to kind of get it out of my system, work out what I think about it, and so on. So that's one thing. The other thing is the best writing advice I've seen. It's in the book Bird by Bird on writing by Anne Lamott. And I can't remember the exact language she uses, so I'll tone it down because I think she was pretty earthy in her language. But write a lousy first draft. Um, most of our don't wait until you feel like you've got something. Don't wait to write until you feel like I know how to write it beautifully. Just barf all over the screen, get all the words down there, and then go back and start rewriting it. Um, I forget who it was. Some famous writer said, "I'm not so much a writer; I'm a good rewriter." And the trouble is, you open a book and you read it, and you assume it just fell out of the author's brain in that form. And for one or two people, that was the case. But for the vast majority of us, I think 98% of us, I'm sure, we go through lots and lots and lots of drafts and changing this sentence around, changing it back again, then changing our mind again. That a lot of writing is doing that. So But you can't do any of that until you've got a really bad first draft to start with. So write a terrible first draft and then try to make it slightly less worse each time you work through it. And by the end of the process, you're like, I think that is presentable. You're never going to be happy with it.
Yeah.
Um, a book is never finished. You every time I have a book come out and I get my hands on it for the first time, I'll open it at a random page and see a sentence that needs tidying up. And I think, oh man, I wish I'd put that differently. But at some point, you just have to abandon it to the publishers and let them do their thing with it.
I'm soaking all this in. You've said so much stuff there that I'm soaking in, and I'm sure many people will be as well. But I did a creative writing master's degree, and one thing I learned, I only did 6 chapters of a Christian fiction novel, but growing up, I always thought I always loved writing. I always thought it was very glamorous and exactly how you've said. You sit down and you write the whole novel. It just comes out of your mind, and it's really not it. There were days it really felt like work, but it's such a wonderful thing to do and such a blessing as well. Um, and going back
Yeah,
to the first, go on, sorry.
I say a lot of the time it feels like you're pulling teeth out. And then there's some occasional moments you're like, man, this is flowing. I'm actually happy with what I'm writing. But most of the time, as I'm writing, I'm going, this is terrible. And then you just got to go back and wade through it again and again and again.
That
That's
makes me
normal.
feel better that it's not just me who experiences that as well.
Yeah.
I think you can really tell the difference in a book as well. Like how you said, if you've got something that's really pressing that you want to write about, I really, really do believe you can tell the difference between someone who's experienced that or someone who's like, right, I need to pay the bills. I'm going to write another book.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, through reading, I think as a reader, a lot of people can sense that. So I think that's really, really valuable advice.
Yeah. I think it helps if you don't have to be financially dependent on your writing. I mean, very few people, I mean, you have to sell a lot to be financially dependent on it. So the fact that I have a day job means, again, I'm not writing it's not like I've got to write a book every 6 months to pay the bills. Which means I have the freedom then to take time, and it's time in the margins of the day job. But that means I don't have to rush stuff out. I can write about what I care about and what I feel the Lord is putting on my heart to write about, rather than I've got to churn something out this year just to keep my head above the water or something like that.
I've just thought of this based off what you just said. How would you tell generally if the Lord is putting something kind of on your mind, on your heart to write about? Kind of, I don't know, what indicators, what do you exactly mean by that?
I mean, I feel a personal sense of constraint and a sort of burden's the right word, because it feels like there's a heaviness to not like a negative heaviness, but oh man, I feel I've got to speak into this. Um, there have been times when I thought, I wonder if I should write on a particular topic. There's a need for it, and I've probably got some thinking already and some other thoughts I can put together. And then someone's come out with a book on that very thing, and I thought, oh, I don't. And then I thought, oh, thank goodness I won't. And then I realized I wasn't actually wanting to write on it. I was feeling like I should. Um, but virtually every book I've written has been out of a sense of I really want to share this with people, this truth with people, and I feel burdened to do that. Um, there are so many books out there, and I think you need a good reason to add to that number. And so you've got to feel personally convinced this is not going to be the book on anything, but I think this might help some people.
Mm.
Something else for me, again, during the process of writing, I'm normally uh, feeling pretty dreadful about what I'm writing and the quality of it. And at times I'll want to give up. So I'm like, I know there's a beautiful way of saying this, and I don't know how to do it. And so if I compare the book to what I wish it was, I get discouraged to the point of wanting to give up. But if I flip it and say, okay, do I think this book would be more useful than someone not reading anything? If the answer to that is yes, then it's worth carrying on. It doesn't have to be perfect, but if it will generally move someone, be a net benefit to someone to read it. I mean, this book with Union with Christ, I said to various people, the doctrine deserves a much more beautiful book than the one I've written. And but I couldn't write that. I'm not that gifted a writer. Um, but I do think what I have written is going to help people. I think it will move them forwards in their love of Christ and of that truth. And if I can say that, then okay, this is worth spending the hours rewriting it, and persevering with it.
So wonderful and such a privilege to talk to you because you've shared like your motivations with writing and I'm just thinking about, is God anti-gay and your books on sexuality and how they really do fill a space that, like with Seven Myths About Singleness, that I think they were so necessary for a book to exist in that space. Um, and I think one thing as well, Sam, about your books is I think they're very accessible. I think to both, I don't know if this was an intention you had for Christians and non-Christians. I think Is God Anti-Gay? I gave that book to someone, a non-Christian, just last week, and it's so incredible to hand a book to someone and to feel confident that as a non-Christian, they'll be able to read that and they'll be able to understand it. So, yeah, when you write, do you have Christians, non-Christians in mind? Is that something you think about?
Yeah, my personal sense of calling and vocation is to be a pastor. So my principal audience when I'm preaching and when I'm writing is the people of God, and trying to do something that I hope will be strengthening to them in their faith. But also, as is the case with preparing a sermon, I'm aware that there will be some, just as in on any given Sunday, there'll be someone in there who doesn't believe, this may be their first Sunday. So you want to make sure whatever you're saying is accessible to them. The same is true of my books as well. I want it to be, if it fell into the hands of someone who knows nothing about the Christian faith, I want it to be intelligible to them. Is God anti-gay? And my book, Why Does God Care Who I Sleep With? Both of those, I was wanting to more intentionally write to an outsider. I was wanting those to be books people could pass on to their friends. So in that case, the non-Christian was the foreground of my thinking.
Mm. And both of those books, I think, are relevant to everyone, but specifically a lot of young adults that are in kind of my YouTube audience, topics that are so relevant nowadays, especially with kind of the prevalence of the LGBTQ movement and um, sleeping around and things like that. So, yeah, to everyone listening, there you go, some great books to read next. And yeah, finally, Sam, I just wanted to ask, what's a great book that you have read recently that you would recommend to other people?
Yeah, there are. So there's lots of Christian books I read where I go, okay, that's a real writer. I'm playing, but this is a pro kind of thing. I love the books by Dane Ortland, Gentle and Lowly, and Deeper are two of my favorite Christian books ever, I think. To the point where I will pick up either, and I don't tire. I don't normally reread books, but I'll happily reread those books um, over and over again. Um, so that would be one recent example. Most of what John Stott wrote, I reread The Cross of Christ recently, and again, just blown away. That is a book for the ages. Um, it was I don't know what anniversary edition of it I was reading, but that book will have many anniversary editions because it's going to serve future generations so well.
Mm,
So those would be a couple of examples.
great. Thank you so much. I read Gentle and Lowly a couple of months ago, and it had been on my shelf for 2 years, and I was really frustrated that it had been on my shelf for 2 years and I hadn't picked it up because that's one that's going to definitely be a classic in years to come, if not already.
Yeah.
So great. Well, thank you so much, Sam. That's
It's a
everything.
pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thanks for your enthusiasm about
Oh,
Christian books. And I hope this is, yeah, I hope that this has encouraged those who are listening.
such a blessing to talk to you just from a personal perspective, but also, yeah, I'm sure it will. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.